Hi guys, and welcome to Total Technik. Today we're looking at rear Brembo brake calipers, and what we're going to be doing on this particular vehicle is fitting it with a brand new caliper. Let's do it. So first thing we need to do is take a look at removing the rear wheels. Now on the Audi Q7 here, one very important thing to point out is some Q7s have air suspension, others don't. Now if your particular one does have air suspension, it actually has a jacking mode, and what that will do is it will actually lock that air suspension so that when you lift the car up, it's not trying to constantly readjust, and that can be accessed by the onboard computer, the MMI system. So before we actually lift the vehicle off of the floor, what we want to do is slacken off the wheel nuts. The reason for that is if you first lift the car up and then try and undo them, the whole wheel can spin. Whereas if you just slacken them off a little bit with the weight still on the ground, then they're really easy to remove completely once you've actually got it off the air and there's no weight on the wheels. So next you want to grab yourself a breaker bar and the correct size socket, and we're going to get these slackened off. When you slacken these off, you probably want to do them maximum half a turn. So next you're going to jack up the corner of the car that you need to work on. Now, it's always a good idea when you're jacking up your car to place some blocks, some pieces of wood, a couple of bricks, something like that, under the front wheels of the car, especially if you have a manual transmission. Another thing to point out quickly is at this stage your handbrake should be disengaged. So to remove the wheel, you don't need to jack it up to full height. What you can do is you can jack it up so that it's definitely clear of the floor, and then you can remove the wheel. That'll just help you stop clipping the inside of the wheel on your disc or your caliper whilst you slide it off. Makes it a little bit easier, and then you can always jack it up higher once the wheel's actually removed if you need to. So now you just want to remove your wheel nuts one by one. Obviously if you've got an air gun, speeds the process up. I'll do it old school for the sake of this example. So just remove all of them until you've got one remaining, and usually it's a good idea to leave one of the top ones in as your last one. So be careful when you remove your last wheel bolt, because depending on how stuck onto the hub the wheel is, the wheel could come loose at this stage. Just be prepared for that. Okay, this one's in position. So next we'll get it popped off. A bit of a wobble just to move it off the hub. Then we've still got it nice and low, so we haven't clattered the top inside of our wheel. So we just slide that directly sideways and we can roll that out of the way. Okay, so one of the key things that tends to get stuck in these is this little pin that goes across the centre right here. We're going to be knocking this out later in the video, but to make this a little bit easier, especially if yours has got a little bit of corrosion or dirt build up on it, what we're going to do is just give it a tiny bit of a clean up, and then what we'll do then is put a little bit of a penetration fluid on it, things like plus gas, liquid wrench, all those kind of products, so whatever you've got handy, and just help to soak these in to hopefully make it a little bit easier for us to get this out in a short while. So to help us clean this up, you see we've got quite a build up of dirt just where the pin passes through this kind of metal part of the caliper right here. So I'm just going to give that a bit of a scrape just around the edges with the hook tool and start getting rid of some of this build up of gunk. There's no point putting the penetration fluid on the top of it, because obviously that's just an extra layer of stuff that it's got to try and get through to actually get into the joint. So it's going to spend a couple of minutes giving that a bit of a clean up, removing the worst of the build up. And we'll just do the same quickly on the opposite side as well. So exactly the same, just give it a bit of a clean up. Every bit you can get off is going to help the removal process. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to grab a penetration fluid. We're using plus gas this time, but products like liquid wrench and all those other brands, there's hundreds of them out there, these help quite a lot. So what I'm going to do, just give it a bit of a soak where the joints are, and also where this pin passes through the pads. I'll give it a little bit on there as well, and of course this opposite side here. And if you can give that about 10 minutes to soak in, what that'll do is that'll work its way into those joints and just help to ease it up a little bit as we go. And what we'll do, whilst we've got the dismantling fluid, is we will just go to our upper and lower caliper bolts and just put a little bit on those as well. So if you look on the rear of the caliper, you've got the brake cable. This is the wear sensor cable. Comes into a little electrical connector just there, and we need to get this disconnected. These can be quite tricky to get off because the end that you're trying to remove is actually within this little metal bracket, so they can be a little bit sticky. So my preferred method on these is to get a hook tool. You can reach in, grab that little tab on the back, pull that downward, and then try and wiggle it off by hand. But sometimes if there's dirt and stuff in there, it won't disconnect easily by hand. You can put a screwdriver in and open it up, as long as you're careful. But the other way of doing it is to come into the front and just to lift the... it's like a little flap in there, I'll show it to you in a minute. So you put your hook tool in, get it under the edge of the flap, and just lift the flap up. And then you can start to wobble it loose. Yeah, he's coming. There he goes. So I'll just show you on the plug there. So hopefully you can see okay. There's a little flap just there. Lifts up and down, and that's what locks it into place. So what you do is you put the hook tool in, and you can kind of feel it when you get it underneath, and just twist it a little bit. That'll lift it up like so, and then start to wobble the thing and pull it backwards, and it'll pop off. Okay, so now we're on this brake wear cable, just popping out of this little slot in there, and also you've got to unhook it from the bottom of this spring right here. So our next stage is going to be to remove this little pin. You can just see the head of it that passes through this kind of main pin that goes horizontally across the centre here. So we've got to pull this out to be able to then slide the pin out. This stops the pin from sliding out accidentally during day-to-day use. This one's going to be pretty well stuck in, so we're going to have to fight a little bit with this. Hopefully yours won't be quite as difficult as this, but I'll give you a couple of tips just in case yours is a little bit sticky. Okay, so if yours is sticky as this one is, believe it or not, the easiest way is to actually give it a tap. So what you want to try and do is break the kind of all the dirt and grime that's built up and solidified there. So if you give it a light tap on the end, yeah, I could see that coming off then, and it's moving. It's actually moved in a tiny bit, so that's perfect. That's a good starting point. Now I can grab my hook tool. I'm going to use it on the tip of the metal here, just as a lever. Yeah, this one's coming now. And just push that forward. Get that to a point, so we know that's now going to come out. So I'll grab some pliers and get that removed. And that's what the little pin looks like. So it kind of sits, the pin sits in this little circular section in the middle, so it passes through and clicks into place through there. So we're going to be trying to attack this this pin by tapping it out next, but there's a quick tip for you. Again, if yours has got a bit of corrosion and a bit of gunk solidified on it, there's a quick tip that we can do that will make this process hopefully a tiny bit easier. Now what you're going to need is a punch tool, and this is what you're also going to need to do the punch the pin out in a couple of minutes time. And what you'll find is that the this little spring right here is kind of looks like a H turned on its side. This spring here, there'll be almost no movement between the spring and this pin, so that's going to be an extra little point of resistance. So what we can do to get around this is just give it a quick tap with your punch. Yeah, so now you can see I can actually move it, whereas it wouldn't move at all before. Now because this one's particularly gunky, I'm just going to give it a bit of a clean off in the centre as well. They're not always this bad. This is a particularly bad one. And remember, every little bit of dirt that I'm scraping off here is going to be a point of resistance when it comes to passing it through the pad and through the end there as well. So the smoother you can get it. Obviously you can't see all of it because half of it's under the springs. As much as you can get is certainly going to help. And also, because this is a particularly bad one, and we haven't tried it yet, but I'm assuming the worst, I'm going to give this a little bit of penetration fluid as well, just to help us all we can. Now you want to make sure that the punch tool that you choose, the diameter of the actual end of the punch tool, is smaller than the diameter of the pin that you're trying to remove. Obviously if you get something that's bigger, it's never going to go through the hole, so you need to make sure it's a lot, well, not a lot smaller, but small enough that it will definitely pass through the hole, so you know, a considerable amount smaller. And just for reference, the one that I'm using today is 6mm, and also if you've got a long one, that's going to help the process a heck of a lot. And also, for the sake of safety, please make sure that you wear goggles when you do this, and ear protection is also a good idea as well. Yeah, so here's our pin. There's a good example there of just how much gunk and rubbish have built up on this. So I said they can be a little bit tricky, as this one was, but the key to it is just to get rid of as much of the build-up of crap from around the sides as you can. Try and scrape off as much as you can. Keep putting the penetration fluid in there, because that will soak in and aid the process, and just keep at it. It will come eventually. So next, removal of the little spring here. It just lifts out. You've kind of got to manipulate it a little bit, just so that you can get the one corner past this little hooked over wire. So that's removed. So next we're going to look at removing the old pads. So to remove the old pads, obviously the old pads are a lot thinner than the brand new pads will be that are going to be going back in. So to remove the pads, we don't need to fully rewind the pistons in the caliper. We can rewind them just a little bit to enable us to remove the pads. The advantage of that is if you can pull these back just a little bit, move these out of the way, then you can actually have a look at the condition of the whatever's visible on the piston, and also the rubber seals whilst they're expanded. You can have a good look around and check that everything is good and you're happy with everything, and then you can look at fully rewinding them. So for the time being, we're going to rewind them a little bit, just enough to slide them out. Okay, now a good easy way to get these out is just grab yourself a large flat-headed screwdriver. The disc in the middle is vented, so obviously it's got holes in the middle of it. So what you can do is just put it into the slot there on the disc and push it on these little top roller sections just here. So put it in, a little bit of light pressure there, and then repeat. You already see this one's almost ready to come out. Same on the bottom there, put it in the slot and pull it back just here. Again, not too much. See, that one's pretty much ready. And then obviously we'll do the same on the opposite side just here with the other pad. Yeah, so they're pretty much there. And if you need to wobble them, obviously we're going to wobble them upward and downward in this direction. If they're sticking, as in the backs of the pads are sticking, you can also wobble them that way a little bit. That'll open up the piston just that tiny bit more. See, that one's sticking, so give it that way, and there it comes. There. Okay, so they're ready to come out. So let's get these removed, and here are the old pads. You can see very badly worn. This one far less worn than this one, but both completely worn. Okay, so I've had a look around and I'm happy with those. So provided that they all rewind okay, which they seem to when I did it by with the screwdriver there, it looked like they were all going to rewind okay. These are good to go. So before we go any further, what we're going to do is fully rewind these pistons back into the body of the caliper. Now there's a couple of ways that you can do this. One, if you've got one available, is to use a one of these brake pad spreader tools. This is specifically for pushing the pistons back. So what you can do is get this to the correct size to fit the gap. I'll show you it both ways. Fit it in between two pistons, and then you can just start to expand it. And as it expands, it will start to push the pistons back in. And you should feel when you're doing this that the resistance to push them back is not all that great. And these are rewinding absolutely lovely. So I've got no concerns on those. So what I'll do is I'll stop doing that before they get fully rewound, and I'll show you the way of doing this same process without one of these tools. So the workaround, if you don't have one of the tools available, is to grab your old pads, slot them back in temporarily, and remember the one on the inside would be the one with the electrical connector. So pop those back in, and then we'll continue the process that we started here. Yeah, that's rewinding. You can feel there's very little resistance there. That was rewinding really nicely. Same on that one. I'll put that one back in upside down. Yeah, like no resistance to that at all. So that's a sign of a good healthy piston. And then what you'll find, because we've spread them in this manner, what we've done is we've actually moved the angle of that brake pad like that, so the piston might not be fully rewound at this stage. So to get it fully rewound, once you've done it in that direction, you can then put it down between the disc and the front of the pad and do it in the opposite direction, like so, like so. Yeah, and then same here. And then what you've done there, to start with, we pushed that out, so that created it angled like that, and then when we put it in and we pressed it from the bottom, that straightened it all up, got it nice and flat. So those should now be fully rewound. So next we need to look at removing the caliper. The caliper is held on with two bolts. This is the lower one right here. As you can see, it's one of these 12-point or spline bits that's going to be needed. We actually need quite a large one. So let's take a quick look at that in a bit more detail, and then we can look at actually getting these bolts out. So this is the set that we're using. This is one, you can get these on Amazon. I'll add a link for you below to either this kit or something very similar. So if you need one of these, you can go and check that out. We'll find you the ones that have got the best prices and add those relevant links for you. So what we need is the second biggest one in this set, which is actually an M16. And it's this 12-point. It doesn't need to be hollow. They're not all hollow. They just tend to make the larger sizes hollow. It's not a security bit or anything like that. Just hollow, I guess, to save materials or whatever. But this is an M16, so it's quite a meaty one. But without these, it's quite simply, those bolts are not coming out. So you need to grab yourself a spline size M16. Okay, it's always a good idea with these is to get your hook tool and give them a bit of a scrape. Hopefully you'll love that noise as much as I do. Reminds me of the dentist. The reason being, if you've got any mud or crud that's in there, when you put the bit in, it won't fully insert. And obviously with these sorts of bolts, you do not want to round these off, so you want to get that bit in as deep as you possibly can. This one looks fairly clean, but they can kind of get a bit of a mud or whatever in there. Just give them a bit of a clean up. So we're going to pop the bit in now. And you'll find it's probably going to be quite tight, as this one is. So to ensure that we get that in as deep as we can, because we do not want to round that bolt off, I'm actually going to hit that in with a lump hammer, just to make sure that it gets all the way in as deep as we can into the head of that bolt. When you're hitting it in, you'll notice when it does go fully inserted, the noise changes. It goes from kind of a bit of a clap to more of a solid thunk when you get into the end. There's nowhere more for it to go. So next you're going to grab your wrench, get that attached on there, or a breaker bar, and Sometimes you can be on really tight. Sometimes you have to attack them from underneath. You can kind of use an extension bar and put your wrench up through the hole in the suspension frame here. But we'll see how we do. These are on at 100 and, I think it's 180 Newton meters. We'll confirm that later in the video. So they are pretty hard. So you've got 180 Newton meters plus a build up of grime and heat, etc. over time. So yeah, for us as predicted, quite a nasty brake job this one, because there's quite a lot of corrosion and stuff in there. That's very hard to get out. Had to move underneath the vehicle, which I appreciate. It's not always possible for people watching at home. You're on jacks rather than a lift. If you've got obviously if you've got an air gun, just put that on there. I'm trying to demonstrate it all without using the air tools. And what you want to do is just pop it back in and give it a few twists, because we still need to remove the second bolt. Then obviously you're going to repeat the process exactly the same on your second bolt. Now on your top bolt, as we've got here, you may well find you've got this speed sensor cable which is directly in the way. You can kind of just about pull it to one side, but if you need to, we can also get that removed, so I'll show you quickly how to do that as well. So this cable's held in a little bracket, and if you have a feel around of it, the gap in the bracket is actually on the towards the centre of the wheel hub, if that makes any sense. So it's not on the Brakeline side, it's on the other side. Just in here is the little slot. So what we need to do is just grab a tool and start manipulating that sideways. So just pop that out. That's going to give you the space you need to get the bit in. So now just carefully lift the caliper off of the disc. Okay, so before we disconnect the caliper, we need to look at the brake lines and just familiarise ourselves with them. So we start up at the top here. This is where the brake line comes down into the brake hose that feeds the caliper. So you can see we've got one connection just at the top here with a little spring clamp there. This comes into the main brake hose, the Flexi one, with a little spring around it. And if you follow that down, that goes all the way down and actually joins here. You've got another one of these connectors, exactly the same as what we've got up at the top there, and that actually comes round into this curved brake pipe, and that pipe links into the actual caliper itself on the side. In addition to that, just below it, you can see we've got this little bolt in the middle here, and that's just to bolt the bracket onto the caliper. So when it comes to replacing your caliper, you would also definitely want to look at replacing this main brake hose just here. You see we've got ourselves a brand new one right here, and this is what we're going to be installing. And there's a very important reason why you want to replace this, because what will happen, obviously the caliper's been on the car for a few years, it's developed the faults that we need to replace this caliper today. And so, you know, we can guarantee that this hose is going to be a good few years old, the same age as the caliper. And what tends to happen on these hoses is just over time you kind of get a build-up of gunk inside them, and what happens is they almost act like a one-way valve, because when you press the brake pedal, it forces the brake fluid down into the caliper. So you know, if your hole starts off this big and it gets clogged, and so you end up with a hole that's, you know, a quarter of the size that it should be, because you're pressing it with pressure. When you press that brake pedal through and just pushing it down, it will force it through even the smallest of holes, so it will work that way. Then when you take your foot off of the brake pedal, obviously it doesn't, there's no pumping force backward, it's just the brake pads squeezing and then releasing, so you just get that tiny little bit of release on the fluid. But because it's being forced back in but it's not being forced back out, it won't be able to get out of that tiny hole because there's not enough pressure. And so what happens is it acts like a one-way valve, and then your brake pads will lock, and so they'll constantly be rubbing and not releasing properly, and you get into all sorts of issues with it. Now these hoses tend to be a lot cheaper than the calipers, so if you're replacing the caliper, then definitely it's worth putting a few extra dollars in to get a brand new hose. It's just not worth replacing the caliper and not replacing the hose, just for that simple reason. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to look at these and clean these up a little bit. I'm actually going to put some, we're using plus gas, liquid wrench or whatever. It's just a dismantling fluid. WD-40 is also not bad. Just going to give this a bit of a soak, just like that. So when I need to disconnect, I'm going to leave that for 5 minutes or so, let that soak in, and what that will do is hopefully that will get in a little bit, break any of the kind of dirt down a little bit, and enable us to get that off a little bit easier. So it's always worth putting a bit of dismantling fluid onto these. I'm also going to do the same, because again I'm not going to be touching these for a few minutes. I do the same on the one here, give that a few minutes to soak in, and also on this one right here as well. And also we've got that little bolt at the bottom just there, put a little bit on there as well, just to help us. So on the other side of the hub here, you've got the speed sensor just here, so we need to disconnect this electrical connector. And then next, if you look just up in here, you can see it's got like one of these little rubber grommets that's attached inside this metal bracket, so we need to push that out in that direction. So next, if you follow where you just disconnected the cable, that's the little, where I just removed this grommet from, just where my thumb is there. Follow this down, you see it splits, and it sits in another little grommet just down in there. So obviously we need to do exactly the same thing there. Just to help us a little bit, I'm just going to get my little pick tool. You can use your hook tool or whatever. Just going to see how much gunk we're getting rid of there, just to make sure, because we want to get maximum grip on this. The last thing we want to do is round this off. So we're just going to give it a bit of a clean up before I get the spanner on it. As well as going around the head, just very carefully. If you've got any built up dirt in there, careful you don't want to scratch the brake line. But this kind of spins around this pipe, if that makes any sense. So this needs to be kind of free of this. So just give that a bit of a clean as well. One thing to bear in mind, obviously, when you do disconnect this, obviously the brake fluid is going to start to drip. So you'll need a tray on the floor to collect that fluid. And also another thing to note is you should have all your other components ready to go, because this will be dripping fairly slowly, but you don't want to leave that for hours and hours and hours or overnight or whatever. You don't want too much air to kind of work its way back up into that system. Now if you need to disconnect this and you haven't got everything that you need 100% ready, or you need to do some kind of swap over, then what you need to do is need to cap this off just to stop the drip of fluid. So that's something to bear in mind. But as long as you've got everything ready to go, it's only going to be off for kind of 10 minutes, 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes at maximum. You're going to be fine with the slow drip. It won't cause you any issues at all. But do be prepared. So obviously once you disconnect this, the line is open, it will drip, you will start losing fluid, so you need to take that into account. So next you're going to need a size 11 spanner. Ideally you want like a flare nut. So this is a special one for doing brakes. It's called a flare spanner or a flare nut spanner. It has this little slot in it, so obviously that perfectly fits around the brake line. So this is your ideal thing. You can do it with a standard socket, but no, of course it's not ideal for this type of fixing, but it can be done. But this is what you want ideally. You can pick these up pretty cheap, a set of these, places like Amazon. We'll add some links for you to the cheapest ones we can find below, so you can go and check those out if you want. But if you're watching this video in advance, it's well worth getting yourself a set of these. Really good thing to have in your toolkit. And as you're undoing this, you want to make sure that this is free spinning. You can see as I'm undoing mine, mine's in here quite tight at the moment, and so it's trying to bend this pipe outwards. That's fine as long as it doesn't start to twist this pipe. So mine's tight, but I do believe it's moving. I'm going to put a little bit more penetration fluid on there just to help me, but just take your time on it. What you don't want to do is actually physically twist the pipe. Just keep an eye on it as you go if yours is a little bit stubborn like this one. So you can see we're getting loose now. Another thing, if you can inspect your brakes in advance of doing the job, very often these little kind of spring clamp things here, these little brackets, these get rusted out quite badly. So if you have a look on yours and yours is rusted to hell, then they're not very expensive. Then you might want to order one of these from your Audi main dealer in advance of doing the job. So now see you've got a little drip now. This is the brake fluid starting to come through. So once it's fully unscrewed, you should find you can just pull it up, and that's actually disconnected just there. Now the hose, it's not too bad actually. What I'm going to do, lift that up. Let's get rid of this little clip. There we go. Yeah, see this hose is actually moving. Sometimes they get jammed in. If yours is rusted up in there and doesn't look like it's going to come out, what you need to do is grab a hammer and very gently on this little metal end of the hose, give it a couple of taps on this side, a couple of taps on that side, just to kind of loosen it up, as we can see that it's doing here. I might have to get the scraper tool on there and just clean that up a little bit, and basically it pulls straight down, as hopefully you'll see in a moment. And obviously you are working with brake fluid here, so you don't want to be doing this without wearing gloves. Hopefully that's fairly obvious. Okay, so there's the main line disconnected. So next we're going to disconnect the other end of this brake line. So obviously we're going to do exactly the same as we did on the other one. Just give it a good clean up before we try and remove it. Yours is a bit stubborn just here. This hose, you can give it a bit of a gentle tap from different angles just to try and start loosening it off. So next we're going to disconnect the line here where it actually passes into the caliper. And when these go on at the factory, they're only about 14 Newton meters, which really isn't a lot of torque, but it's just kind of the corrosion and the grime that ends up making them hard to crack off. Once you're rolling, they tend to be fine. That allows you to remove this little line, including the spring clip. Keep all that safe, put that to one side for fitting onto the new caliper. So next we're going to disconnect the bracket. There's a size 10 nut just in the middle there. So grab your size 10 socket and just get that unscrewed. Keep your the bolt there, keep that safe to one side, and just tuck your bracket just out of the way. So now the caliper itself is completely free and can be moved away from the vehicle. Okay, so here is the old caliper. Now we can see our faulty piston right here. Now when it comes to replacing these calipers, if you've got a dodgy caliper like this one, the one that's got a fault on it, then you've got two options. You can either try repairing it, or you can obviously get a new caliper. Brand new, these calipers are very, very expensive, so that might not be an option that you want to look at. You can buy them second hand on eBay fairly inexpensively, so that might be an option. This particular caliper is fitted to quite a few different models, so you can take the part number off of it and go straight onto eBay and check that out. If you're looking, and the other option is to replace the faulty components, then you can look at getting new seals and a new piston and getting this cleaned up properly. However, what you might find is when you start pricing up these components, depending on how many you need and the complexity, and if there's anything else you spot that you're not 100% happy with in addition to your fault, these kind of things can start to add up quite quickly, because these can, these are tens of dollars each, and then it doesn't take much until you're up to $50, $80, and then $100. And the other option that you might want to be looking at, which is what we've done in this instance, is a reconditioned caliper. So let's have a look at what we've got. So this is the reconditioned caliper that we purchased. Comes with a brand new clip for the pads, which is a nice touch. And it's also a nice little, I don't know if you guys can see that, one of those little spring clips for the bar that goes across the centre for the rod. Let's have a look at this caliper. Now we managed to pick this up for $120 Canadian, which is about $100 US. What's that, about £80, something like that, 80 euros plus tax. So if you can find a company that does recondition ones, sometimes they can work out a lot cheaper, because even second hand on eBay, these are about $100. So for $120 you can get one that's been fully reconditioned. It's got all the seals have all been replaced, and of course it's been given a nice new coat of paint. You can see this, it's old, you know, you can see that it's a reconditioned one. There's various little bits where they clean the old corrosion out and things like that. Brand new bleed nipples on there as well. So yeah, all in all, you can see they've done a pretty good job with that, and that might be a good way of saving money rather than going second hand, because all of the seals and everything are brand new. So as we have a reconditioned caliper, we've got to replace some things, including the Brakeline. You don't get a new one of these, and neither would you if you bought a second-hand one. And also there's this little brake line under this metal cover just here, that's going to be fitted across the bottom of the new caliper, just in there. You can see they put the little plugs in there ready for it. So we need to get this metal kind of a protective cover off, and then remove this brake pipe and refit that into place on our new caliper. So before we start, penetration spray. Give that 10 minutes whilst we're messing around. Also there's a couple of little screws on here. So I've got these little screws on the side, Torx 27s. Let's just get those removed on both sides. And next, just lift this this metal section off. It's got this two little clips that just sit over this section here, but the whole thing should just slide off. So looking again at our reconditioned caliper, we have to refit this this pipe that comes across the bottom just here, connects the two sets of pistons together. Now on our old caliper, we've tried removing it from the old caliper, but unfortunately it's in such bad condition we could not get it out, and we ended up rounding it off, and we tried pretty much everything to get it out, but it was a lost cause. So unfortunately we've had to buy a new hose. It's annoying that the this reconditioned caliper does not come with one of these hoses, with one of these lines. We've had to buy this. Put the part number on the screen for you. Both front and rears have this same type of pipe attached, and that same part number, if you remove the B, I believe is the front one, and with the B on the end of it is the rear one, which is what we're doing in this instance. Obviously that could vary depending on the exact caliper you're working on, but for this Q7 one that we're working on today, that is the correct part number. So this needs to be installed. These little purple caps will pull out, and this needs to be installed right there. Now when it comes to tightening any of these fixings up, even on this reconditioned caliper, they actually stick this new this little label on it saying soft aluminium castings, do not cross thread or over tighten, damaged threads void the warranty. So all I still need to do is be reasonable and not really crank on this to do it up. All you try and do is get nice and snug, and that'll do it. And again, when you come to put all this back together and back on the car, and you've bled the brakes and everything, and you're pushing the fluid back through, these are one of the points that you're going to want to check for a potential leak, because of course we've just replaced both of these seals here, so potentially if it's not done up tight enough, or there's a problem in the thread or something like that, you could get a little leak from there. So when you're doing your final checks, coming back and looking at the calipers after the job's done, these are 2 points that you want to make sure aren't leaking, as well as obviously the top ones as well. So now I've got this little protective shield to refit. So just hook that over this little padded section in the middle of the pipe. Turn that over, and you've got the little screw holes just here. Remember, we have these little Torx screws, so just put those in, get those tightened up. And again, you don't want to over tighten them, just nice and snug. So next, remove the last of these little purple caps. And we're going to loosely fit this this brake line. We're not going to do it up all the way. We're going to do that up whilst it's actually when you're putting it back together on the car. So we're going to attach this loosely to begin with. So this comes up, out, and then points back down. Obviously this is the bottom of the caliper with the metal shield that we just fitted. So we're just going to get it roughly tightened up a few spins, because I'm not going to fully tighten it yet. We'll do all that when it's back on the car, so we're going to need the movement in it. We'll just ensure that this is started, and then we can move on to the next stage. So now you're kind of working slightly backward on yourself, so the caliper is going to fit that way on. So obviously we've got the bolt holes at the rear here, so that's the rear of the caliper. So if I just bring that up, here's your pipe. The pipe will end up in that position there, and this actually needs to be bolted on just about there, so that when this comes back up, this will pass through that hole by the spring and into the new hose. So it's a little bit complicated. So like I said, you're working kind of upside down and backwards. Just take your time, work it out, and you'll get the right angles. And you'll notice just below the brake line there, moulded onto the caliper housing, there's like a little line just there. And what that will do is when this goes down flat next to it, this will actually prevent it from coming off the angle. So as long as it's somewhere in that angle there, that angle range, you'll be absolutely fine. So that line's going to help you out as you clamp it down. And this is size 10, particular one. Again, it's nice and snug. Remember, it is an aluminium housing, so don't over tighten it. Now we've got this kind of spring clip assembly to put together, so make sure you've got your little clip there, and grab the new hose. And remember that the hose has got like two little tabs on it, top and bottom, and the hole there has also got two little slots in it, and that will stop it turning once you start to do it back up. So offer it all up, and I'm going to grab my spanner and then start to tighten that assembly up. And when you offer it up, make sure it's square, straight in relation to the hose, because you don't want to cross thread. And as you're screwing, if it suddenly feels tighter than it should, stop, take it out again, start again. You don't want to cross thread anything in these lines. So once we've got that in the correct position, we need to ensure that we also tighten up the hose where it goes into the body of the caliper as well. Okay, so I'm just going to make sure that my cable's not in the way, so I need to be reseating this. And just to help me a little bit, what I'm going to do is I'm going to offer the caliper up, get the bolt in it. We are replacing the bolts on this side as it's a new caliper. These are brand new ones. I'll put the part number on screen. Good idea with replacing these is because they've got these kind of 12-point star pattern inside. They can kind of round off quite easily. The reason that they do that is to allow you to when you're working in from underneath and you haven't got much room and you're sticking your tool up through the gap here, this allows you to kind of catch any angle, because you've only got to turn it a little bit, whereas if you only had 6 sides you'd have to turn it quite a lot more, if that makes any sense. So I can kind of understand why they do it, but it's annoying because when these get rusted out, there's a possibility that obviously these can round out. So worth replacing if you can. So I'm just going to pop that one in, turn in by hand a few times, make sure it's definitely in. I'm just going to use that, just hold that caliper in place for the moment. So next we're going to route this this cable back into place, get that out of the way. So remember, it comes down to the far side of the hub there, so I'm going to feed that back down, and then it's got to be clipped in 3 places. You can kind of see them as you come back across the hub, and this final one actually clips into the bracket that's on the caliper. So here's what we're aiming for right here. Screwing this cable across, I'm going to plug it in at the end. You can see just tucked up in there, that's the first of our 3 little eyelets for the cable grommets to pop into. There's the first, and the second one tucked up in here. This is right next to your caliper here. So just for your reference, these 2 little brackets are quite close to one another. There's one just there at the end of my finger, and the last one is in the caliper bracket itself. That's got a little hole in it there as well. And remember, with your last one that goes into the caliper bracket, we don't want to pop that in yet because it actually gets in the way of our bolt just here. So we're going to leave that one out for the time being. We just got to make sure that we remember to pop that back in at the end because we need access to our bolt. Again, when you're screwing these together, don't do it at an angle, try and get them nice and square with one another before you start. If anything doesn't feel right, stop and start again. So, and it's getting nice and snug. Remember, it's only meant to be like 14 Newton meters. We just want to make sure that it's nice and snug. And then any little drips all the way around. Give it a bit of a clean up, get rid of all the brake fluid, because we're going to be checking this later for potential drips, because this is one of the areas where it can spring a leak, and so we don't want to confuse any old brake fluid with any potential new brake fluid. Just make sure you give it a really good dry up. So next, before we start putting any fluid through here, going to pop these out. They don't come with the little bleed nipple covers, the little caps. You can buy these very inexpensively. Places like eBay, also you can get these on Amazon. I'll add a few links for you if you get stuck. Look in the descriptive text below. These are just fairly generic ones. I want to make sure that I've definitely got a cap on both of them. So I'm going to repeat this process, and then what I'm going to do is just make sure that they are closed for the time being, so we can carry on with the brake job without having to worry about anything potentially dripping out of there. Just make sure that's closed. I'll just pop that on there for the second. So what I do is I do exactly the same on the other one before we progress. So now just get your second caliper bolt, get that fitted down at the bottom. Just for the moment, again, hand tight. So now you've got to torque up your caliper bolts, and it's 180 Newton meters, 180. So now we'll go ahead and we'll put our speed sensor cable back in place. So now we have the final part of the speed sensor cable, and remember, you've got to snap this in to the top of the metal bracket that attaches onto the caliper. Okay, so next we're going to talk about the brake pads. A couple of things that we've done is we've had to buy these separately. We've got a brand new pin and clip because the old one wasn't in the best shape. Probably would have cleaned up, it's only a metal pin, but these definitely weren't in good shape. So we've got a brand new pair of the clips, one for this side, one for the other. And additionally, we've had to get hold of the wear sensors. Now, when you buy your pads, these ones only come with the pads. They don't come with any extras. Sometimes, when you buy these, they will come with various components. Sometimes you might get these with them. You won't get that with it. Sometimes you get these with them, and sometimes you can even get the wear sensors included with them as well. So when you're shopping around for your brake pads, always having a look at the various different options, because you might be able to pay an extra, $4 or £5, $6, $7 up front and get one that has all this stuff with it, and that's a lot cheaper than trying to buy it separately later. So just bear that in mind when you're choosing your pads. So for your brake pads, let's just open these up real quick. When you're handling the brake pads, remember that the faces of these are slightly absorbent, so you don't want to get any of your grease onto the face of these pads, because that will soak in. You can't just wipe it off. So that's very, very important. Always be careful of that. So what we're going to do now is look at the process of popping these back in. So just a quick note for when you connect your wear sensors later on. If you have a look at the pad, they actually have a little kind of ridge that's raised on the pad side, and that's to kind of stop you fitting them in the wrong way, if that makes any sense. So you'll find that they only actually fit in the one way, so they fit in that way, and if you try and put them in the wrong way around, you won't actually be able to get them in. So that's something to bear in mind, and literally when you come to do these, you just push them down. You see it's got a little barb on it, and that will just click into place. So it's always a good idea when you're fitting the pads, just to help them out a little bit. They do normally have these little backing plates on them, so they're much better than they used to be years ago. But it's still a good idea where the pistons actually touch the back of the pad, just to get a little thin layer of your brake grease, or you can use copper grease called anti-seize. That's the kind of more traditional product. Just a little thin layer like that. That will help you not only get them in, but that will help things to stop binding to the rear of the pads. Additionally, you'll notice when you look down into the caliper, there's metal pins in there, and that's where these sit. These butt up against these little metal pins. So again, you don't want to get this on the face of the pad, but just where it sits, just there. Again, that will just help that to stop binding and give it a little bit of a lubrication for your installation. So now I just want to slot the pads into place. And the opposite side, exactly the same. So next we've got our brand new spring clip, and then we're going to put that in place. The little kind of bracket for your wire that goes at the bottom, and then you're going to take your pin and you can feed that in from this side. I'm just going to put a little bit of grease on this just to help lubricate it as it passes through. You find you've got to compress these springs quite a lot by hand. There we go, to get them started. Also, they've got a little ridge on them. Kind of got to do it twice. There we go. That's nice. It's actually just ended up with the hole facing in the right position. As you can see there, just ready to put my clip in. It needs to be so you can kind of see the hole here and here. You're going to have to pop it back, turn it a little bit and push it back through. So I got lucky on that one. Just going to give it one little tap with the hammer just to make sure it is fully inserted, and I'll pop that clip in. So for your wear pad sensor, start on the end, which is furthest from your electrical plug, and this is going to be your outside one just here. Remember that they only fit in one way, so the kind of the fatter side should be in towards the face of the pad, in towards the disc there. Make sure that's properly seated. That feels good. Remember the thick side in towards the pad. Just got my screwdriver. Pop that down in there, and again, make sure it's properly seated. It feels good down there. And then the cable that joins the two, I'm just going to hook that up into this little bracket just there. So next, take your electrical connector and making sure we've got it around the right way. Can be quite tricky because of the little metal bracket. There it is. So it's inside the metal bracket. Push it up till hopefully it will click. Yeah, a little click there. Pull it back, make sure it's in there tight. Yeah, we're secure. Finally, remember we've got this little slot just in here for taking this cable just here. This is an aftermarket wear sensor, and the rubber's quite thick on this, so it might be quite tricky to get this into this slot, but we'll persevere with it. So our caliper is now fitted and everything's back together, the brake pads are in, everything is as it should be. However, we know that the caliper is full of air, because obviously it was full of air when it was fitted to the car. It was completely open and we've not bled the caliper yet. So that's what we're going to do next, is we're going to look at bleeding this one caliper. So we'll show you that process. However, in addition to that, as per the Audi workshop manual, they recommend that whenever you replace one of these calipers, be it front or rear, that you always perform, once the job is done, a full brake bleed for all four corners. So that's very, very important. We're going to do a separate video on that, how to do a complete bleed. We'll add a link for you in the descriptive text below, so if you need any help with that, we can go, you can go down, check that link out and carry that on. But before we do that, what we want to try and do is get as much air out of this caliper as we can, and then we'll be in a position where we can do the full bleed if you want to. So be sure to check that video out, because it is recommended as per the Audi workshop manual. So when looking to bleed the brake system manually using the brake pedal, which is what we're going to be doing in this video, it's kind of the easiest, kind of most traditional way, if you like. One very important factor is when you're pressing that brake pedal down, it's obviously going to be pushing the brake fluid through the system and out of the bleed nipple on the top. And it's very important as you're working around the car and keeping an eye on whichever caliper it is you're working on at that time, that the brake fluid reservoir, which on this particular car is hidden under this little flap here, just by the back of the bulkhead here, that this never ever runs dry. So you've got to keep an eye on this as you go around the car. If you're swapping from caliper to caliper, stop, come and have a look, and if you need to, put a bit more fluid in the top of this. You never want this to run dry, because what will happen is if that brake fluid runs out and you squeeze it all through the caliper that you're working on, then this will actually start to suck air into the system, and then you're going to get into a whole heap of trouble that you really don't want to be in, and is completely avoidable. So that's the kind of the biggest tip I can give you, really, is keep an eye on the level as you go around the car working on your caliper. Never ever let that run dry. Don't let that suck air into the system. So now, before you take the top off your brake fluid reservoir there, you always want to give it a good clean. Now, right in front of it here, you can see I've got lots of dust, etc. So I'm going to give all this a good clean off, and then I'm going to clean the top of the brake fluid cylinder, give that a really good clean. The reason being is when you take the lid of this off, you don't want any particles, any of these little bits of leaves and debris getting into your brake fluid or your brake system. So that's why it'll even have a little message. You can't see it, there'll be a message there at the back, no doubt, that'll say you should always clean this top off before removing the lid. So let's make sure that we do that. So once you've got him cleaned up and you're happy with it, what you're going to do next is pop the lid off and just double check the level. And if your level's not on maximum, because we're doing a bleed, now's a good time to top it up to maximum, because obviously you know that level's definitely going to drop as you draw the fluid through the system. And just a quick note for reference, typically on an Audi or VW, the whole system will take around 1 litre to 1¼ litres. So you're looking about 0.25 to 0.3 of a litre per caliper. So that'll give you an idea of kind of how much is in the whole system. So if you're doing a full brake bleed, then obviously you want to aim to get at least a litre to 1.25 litres out of the system. So you top your brake fluid up, just pour it in slowly, just in case you get an airlock in there. You don't want it pumping out over the top, just a little bit at a time. gently go down, so you'll find it'll come up and then kind of drop back down again. Just keep doing that until you're around the max level on the side of the reservoir. And then whilst you're doing the bleed, it's a good idea just pop your lid back on, and then keep an eye on the level as I said before, and just pop that back off, put a little bit more in as and when required. It only takes a couple of seconds, better to do it with the lid on. So there you go. So super quick overview of the basic process for bleeding this caliper. So on the top, because it's a Brembo caliper, we have two bleed nipples, one either side, an inside one and an outside one right here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to work on these one at a time, and remember what we're trying to do is get the air out of this system. So what we'll do is we'll actually get a second person to sit in the car, and they'll be gently pushing the brake pedal in and out. Now very important, when that person jumps in the car and they're pressing the brake pedal down, make sure that you tell them not to jump in the car and literally push that brake pedal all the way down to the floor, because there's nothing to stop the brake pedal. Normally the brake pedal is quite firm when you press it, so you can never physically press it all the way down to the floor. However, when you've got an open line, of course the pressure is released, so in theory you can push that brake pedal right down to the floor, but you don't want to do that because the piston in the master cylinder gets a load of kind of gunk that builds up over time, and it's never pushed in that far. So if all of a sudden you start pushing it further, you can kind of crumble that gunk off, and it can get into your brake system, and it's just an extra hassle that you don't need. So don't press that brake pedal any further down than kind of about halfway. Nice gentle slow strokes halfway down. Make sure the person knows not to put their foot right down to the floor. So what we'll do is once they start to put some pressure on the system, this bleed nipple here needs to be opened up so that the brake fluid can push through the system and actually start to push the air out of here. So we're going to connect a pipe onto here and keep an eye on all of the air, and what we want to see is that brake fluid coming back through with no air bubbles in it. So that's basically how it's going to work. We're going to attach a clear pipe onto here. The other person's going to sit in the car, gently pumping that brake pedal. We're going to keep an eye on all the air coming through the system until we see the fluid starting to come through, and that's what we want to keep an eye out for. And then another thing is when you lock this off, once you're happy that there's no more air bubbles coming through and it's just brake fluid on each of the brake depressions, then this needs to be locked off whilst it's still under pressure. So you have to say to your person, yeah, and give it one more little pump on the brakes, and as they're doing it, bang, you lock it off, because what will happen is when you release the pressure, it will start to kind of feed backwards, if that makes any sense. So you always want to close this when they're actually putting pressure down on that pedal. And these calipers are a little bit more complex as they have the inner and outer bleed nipples. Now if this was full of brake fluid already, as it will be when we do the full full brake bleed on our other video, then this outer one is the one that you utilize first. Now when you've got two like this and the whole thing is completely full of air, what you might find is you have to swap back between them. So we'll start on the outer one as normal, and then we'll come back into the inner one and see how we're doing there, and then you might find you want to shoot back to that one, double check that one, and then back to that one as well. So you might have to kind of play around between the two. Only because this literally has no brake fluid in it whatsoever, and so it's going to be interesting to see where those pockets of air tend to sit, but you do have to bleed both of these. Okay, so what we have here is a simple DIY brake bleeding tool, which is a piece of a tube and an empty pop bottle. We're actually making a video on how to make one of these. When that video is ready, again, we'll add a link for you. You can buy these sorts of things for about £15, but you can literally make one for £2 or £3. The only thing you've really got to buy is the pipe. But this is what you need, and what we're going to do is attach this onto the brake nipple. And of course another advantage of using a nice transparent 2 litre bottle like this is when you come to do your, we know we're probably going to take about a quarter. So half of this is 1 litre, it's a 2 litre bottle, so about a quarter of it is going to be this full caliper, if that makes any sense. And when we come to do a full brake bleed, we know we're going to be taking about 1.25 litres through, so you can just keep putting it through the system, and you know kind of how much has come out the other end. That's another good reason to use these nice transparent ones. And the reason that we've got a little bit of fluid already in the bottom is because what you might find is when you first start the process, it'll actually want to draw back up when you initially start, draw back up. And so if haven't got any fluid at the bottom, it will want to try and pull air back into the system. So if you just have a little bit down at the bottom, then if it does try and pull any back up, all it's going to do is pull in a little bit of the new brake fluid here in the bottom. So we just push that over, and then what we've got, so we've got a little handle, so I can just get a cable tie to attach it onto there. Find any suitable place to hang it from. So you can grab your spanner so that you're ready. It can either be a normal spanner on this, you only need to undo it a little bit, or you can use your standard brake spanner. Just get it to a point where you know that it's ready to undo. And then we're at the stage now where we're ready to get the second person to start pumping this brake, and as they do that, as they start to press down, we'll open this up and the air will come through, and then we'll keep monitoring that until we finally see the fluid coming through. Yeah, so we can see the fluid now just starting to come through. Do that until we see no air bubbles coming through. It's looking pretty good now. So what we'll do is we'll get ready to tighten this up. Okay, so one more pump. Perfect, that's that side. We may come back to that. Now we repeat the same process on the inner one. Okay, start to pump. Perfect. Yeah, keep that going for me. Okay, one last pump. Got it. Okay, so we've now done both of these bleed nipples, and I'm happy that there's no air left in these, and this is all coming through exactly as it should. So I'm happy with that. And now is also a good opportunity, now that we've had a bit of pressure going through the system, especially when we lock those off, to go back and check all of your connections where you connected your new hose, and same into the rear of the caliper and the fixed pipe. Check all the connections there on the back, make sure that nothing is leaking, because now is an ideal opportunity. So now we're happy with that caliper. What we're going to do on this particular car is we are going to go ahead as per the Audi workshop manual, and we're going to do the full brake bleed on all 4 calipers, including doing this one again. As mentioned before, that will be a separate video, and if you want to follow along with that, just check out the link below, and you can check that out and go ahead and do that to your own caliper. But that's the basic process. We've now got all of that air out of this new caliper. So there we have it. We have now completed the installation of our new Brembo rear brake caliper. And obviously, before you jump in your car and shoot down the motorway at 70 miles an hour, or the highway at 100 kilometers an hour, whatever it might be, you want to make sure that your brakes are actually fully operational. So you want to put your car into drive, roll it backwards and forwards between drive and reverse a few times just on your driveway. Make sure that the brakes are feeling good, then take it for a short little drive around the block, again making sure that everything feels like it should do. The brake pedal's nice and firm, the action on the brakes is feeling good, nothing's locking up. And then also another thing to do is, once you've done that initial drive, is always to come back and double check each of the points where you could have a brake fluid leak, just to double check that you haven't haven't got one. And once you've done that, you're good to go, and that is job done. Really appreciate you watching. Thanks a lot, guys. If you could do us a quick favour in return, be sure to at least hit that like button for us. That helps us. And if you could help us even more by hitting that subscribe button, that would be genuinely appreciated. We'll see you again. Thanks, guys.